All right, so um, as you are getting your paper out, because you drew the sketch of Solomon's temple, right? Because that was question number one. At least Doug's honest. Yeah, question number one was draw a sketch of Solomon. We're going to ask you all to hold it up right now. No, I'm just kidding. So we're going to talk a little bit about the temple. Of course, what was the forerunner to the temple? What came before the temple? Tabernacle. That's right. What is the main difference between the tabernacle and Solomon's temple? Permanence versus moving, right? The tabernacle was a tent. It was designed to move from place to place. Now, here in this portion of Israel's existence, as we saw last week, they have received the land that God had promised. And so here they are as God's people in this land that God had promised them. We're having a longer stay, and so it's now appropriate to build the temple. David wanted to. God refused David's request, but he said, I will allow your son to do it. And so Solomon is the one who built this temple. And this is the temple that's going to last how long? Don't give me years, just give me significant events. To the Babylonian captivity, right? And the Babylonians are going to decimate the city and destroy this temple under whose reign? Nebuchadnezzar, that's right. And then at what point is the temple going to be rebuilt? Do you remember? You don't got to give me dates. Ezra, very good. Ezra is going to see the foundation of the rebuilt temple laid down. And then you're going to have some more skirmishes surrounding the temple, but ultimately that temple is going to be added onto and everything. And then it's going to spend later some 40 odd years in construction, and we end up with what in the New Testament? Herod's temple. That's right, Herod's temple. Okay. So let's talk about this temple as it was originally designed here. 1 Kings chapter 5. Let's flip over there real quick. Primero de Reyes capítulo 5. 1 Kings chapter 5. So you have Solomon reaching out and starting to get all the materials necessary for construction. Hiram, the king of Tyre, is going to send cedars of Lebanon. Chapter 6, we're going to start building the temple. And in verse 14, so Solomon built the house, and he finished it. And then we get some dimensions that are given here. The end of chapter 6. Chapter 7, we learn about Solomon's palace and the construction that goes into that. We learn more about the temple beginning in chapter 7 and verse 13 and some of the things that are going to go into it. And then in chapter 8, what's going to happen? What's notable in chapter 8?
Dedication.
Yeah, the temple is going to be dedicated after we bring what into the temple? Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant is going to be brought into the temple. There's going to be the dedication. Solomon gives this address to the people, this house that he has made for the name of God. And then what's going to happen that indicates God's approval of all of this? What's going to fill the temple? Yeah, this smoke, this glory of God is going to fill the temple, showing God's approval of everything that has been done. All right. We're going to divide the temple, and I spent a real long time on this, just really searching Google and throwing that up there for you. But this is kind of a representation, a sketch, a cross-section of what the temple probably looked like. You've got four real components here as we're looking at it. Number one, if we can do this right here, we've got the courtyard area, all right here. And three main things here in the courtyard, what are they? You can look at paragraph number 3 in your lesson book if you need it. You've got the 10 lavers, right? You see 5 right here. There are 5 on the other side of the temple. What were these lavers for? I don't know because I didn't bring my workbook to class. There you go, washing the offerings. Right. Look at 2 Chronicles chapter 4. 2 Chronicles chapter 4. Segundo de Crónicas capítulo 4, verso 6. 2 Chronicles chapter 4 and verse 6. He also made 10 basins in which to wash, and he set 5 on the right side and 5 on the left side to rinse things for the burnt offering. But the sea was for the priest to wash in. And the sea, that's going to be this thing right here. And so you've got these 10, 5 right here, and 5 on the other side. So 5 on the north side, 5 on the south side. That you would wash the things pertaining to the burnt offerings. You would wash those in those 10. This large basin, bronze basin, is where the priests would wash for their work of service, particularly as it related to the burnt offerings. And of course, that's the other thing that's here, is going to be the altar. What is different about the altar in the temple contrasted to the altar in the tabernacle?
The fact that it couldn't be moved.
There you go. Lynn, the size of it, right? And what do you have leading up to it here in the temple? You got steps. What did you not have with the altar under the tabernacle? You were specifically forbidden to have steps going up to it. All right, so that's one of the differences here. This is kind of interesting. You're there in 2 Chronicles. Look at 2 Chronicles chapter 3. Segundo de Crónicas capítulo 3, verso 8. Chapter 3 and verse 8. Somebody read chapter 3 and verse 8 for us real briefly.
Now he made the room of the Holy of Holies. Its length across the width of the house was 20 cubits, and its width was 20 cubits. And he overlaid it with fine gold, amounting to 600 talents.
All right, thank you, Brother Roach. And then I want you to, let's look at chapter 4, capítulo 4, verso 1. Chapter 4 and verse 1. Somebody read that for us.
Then he made a bronze altar, 20 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, 10 cubits in height.
I'd never noticed this until this study today. Maybe some of you had, and you're just a better Bible student than me. The altar shares dimensions with what? Most holy place, right? Same dimensions for the altar, same dimensions, at least length and width, for the most holy place. I thought that was rather interesting there. I think that's probably certainly it's by God's design, and I think that probably communicates something to us about approaching a holy God and how that is done, and the necessity for sacrifice. When we start to move in towards the temple, you'll notice this is the main entrance. This is going to be the porch area, and it faces east, right? That's not facing the primary way that people would enter into the city. It's not facing the primary way that people would approach the temple. But it is facing what distinctive geographic feature in Jerusalem?
Jordan River.
It's going to face out toward the river. What hill or mountain? Mount of Olives is going to be right out from there. And what's going to happen at the Mount of Olives in the New Testament? Okay, Jesus is going to be arrested, Garden of Gethsemane. He's going to sit on the Mount of Olives in Matthew 24 and talk about what? the destruction of the temple. And then in Acts chapter 1, what happens with Jesus? He ascends into heaven. Where is he when he ascends into heaven? Take a wild guess. On the Mount of Olives. The temple is facing the Mount of Olives, and certainly there may be some significance to be seen there. If we get really down into it, in Ezekiel chapter 8 through Ezekiel chapter 11, Ezekiel has this vision of the glory departing from the temple. And the glory, it's this same picture of what Ryan described. The smoke that filled the temple back in 1 Kings is there again in Ezekiel chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. But this time it is not filling the temple. This time it is leaving the temple. And it's going to go out towards the east. And so the glory of God leaves and goes towards the east and dissipates out there. But now it's looking towards the east. Here's the idea perhaps of renewal and hope. Because as this temple faced the east and saw the glory of God leave, it now faces the east and sees the capstone of redemption, Jesus Christ, ascending into heaven to be our high priest. And certainly there may be some significance there and some message to us about hope even in darkness. Certainly that would have been something that would have been helpful and hopeful for Ezekiel and those who had the same kind of
Captives are toward the east.
the captives, certainly. Absolutely. You've got two pillars here on the porch that are named Jachin and Boaz. Depending on how we're measuring things, and that's iffy at times, tenuous in the Old Testament. It's possible these are 180 feet tall. More likely that they're 30 feet tall, but just recognize there is some question there. This marked the entrance into what we would call the temple proper, and the porch was overlaid in what? Okay, so when we're outside the temple, what metal are we using? Bronze, brass, copper, something like that, right? And as we move into the temple, now what do we have? Now we've got gold, right? Is there, and Scripture doesn't reveal this, understand we're just left to make possibly some of these connections for ourselves. But I wonder if there's not something to be said here about, here is man approaching God and we're dealing with bronze. And here we are, the high priest going into the most holy place one time a year, and he's entering into a place that is what? Pure gold, right? I wonder if this doesn't communicate to us something about the holy God. And approaching a holy God and the need for holiness in our own lives. Certainly, I think that's something that's being communicated to us here. Lynn.
When Solomon dedicated the temple, he slaughtered 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. Now, if you compare that to the modern day slaughter plant, they might get 1,000 with a lot of people working on a daily basis.
Lynn, I'm glad I have you in Bible class because you know a whole lot more.
We don't walk away with that image.
Right. This is massive, right? Massive operation going on here. And I don't say that lightly either, Lynn. You bring something to the table experience-wise about that I just don't know about.
It's a lot of work and a lot of blood.
A lot of, and that's something, right? We see this picture right here, and it's clean, right? And it's spotless. If you approach the temple courtyard, if you're a fly on the wall flying into the temple courtyard on a normal day, what's it like? There's an odor. There's an odor of animal. There's an odor of smoke, of burning flesh and burning offal, blood. Okay? And then what else are we seeing? Slaughter. There would be blood everywhere, including lots of burnt flesh. There's going to be blood lots of places, but including on whom? Yeah, the priests, you know, we get these pictures for our kids in Bible class, and rightly so, I'm not saying this is wrong, of the priests in their priestly regalia, and certainly would have worn those, right? But what would those robes often have been covered in? Blood. You would not have walked into the temple and walked out with the conclusion, with any other conclusion except blood is important in this whole scheme. There's something significant about blood. Lynn.
We get a little insight into that clear back in Egypt, because Moses would talk about them leaving because Egyptians didn't want to see it as repulsive.
Could be.
Clear back if you read. The other thing is your question two triggered a lot, and that was gold. I did the calculations.
We're going to get to that in just a second. We'll get to that in just a second.
David left the gold, silver, bronze, and precious stones for Solomon. And what I was going to tell you, I'll do the calculations later if you want more. But he left 3,000 to build the temple. The people raised talents. The people raised 5,000 for the service.
Yes.
That gives you an insight into how many people it took to run the temple.
This is a big operation that's going on. Big operation that's going on. Very good. So we move then into the third part of the temple, and it's going to be right here. What's this area called?
Holy place.
The holy place. That's right. What do we have in the holy place that's notable? Table of showbread. Who could eat the table of showbread? From the table of showbread? Priest could. That's right. Yeah, we've got the lampstands in there. Very good. Okay. And then we've got the entry into what? You've got the entry into the most holy place. Who's going into the most holy place? High priest. How often is the high priest going into the most holy place? Once a year. Okay. And on what day is he going into the most holy place? Day of Atonement. That's right. Okay. When you walk into the most holy place, what are you seeing? We've got the Ark of the Covenant there. We've got two cherubim in there, right? Singular is cherub, yes, for all the grammatomaniacs in the audience. We've got one cherub. We got two cherubim. And what do they look like?
Big wings.
Big wings. Wings that are spread out to either side of the room and then touching over the ark. And these cherubim are fashioned out of gold. That's right. Who had their hand up over here? Go ahead, Eddie.
Curtain going into the most holy place.
Yes,
Significant because of what we see later on.
absolutely. We've got this division between the holy place and the most holy place, and when Jesus dies on the cross, that veil, that curtain is going to be split in two, and that's certainly, when we're going to read from the book of Hebrews in a little bit, we're certainly going to see what all that is about. Yes, Jim?
You're going to talk about the altar of incense.
Oh, yeah, we've got the altar of incense in here too, don't we? I missed that one. Thank you, Jim.
And it's out in the holy place, but on the Day of Atonement, it's moved into the holy
There you go. Very good. Very good. Let's see here. Yeah, the altar of pure gold upon which the incense is offered is there in the holy place. At one point, you've got doors as described in 1 Kings chapter 6, a veil in 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 14 that Eddie is describing. It separates the holy place from the most holy place. You go into the most holy place. We've got the two golden cherubim in this square room. Wings outspread to the sides of the room while facing the center of the room, 2 Chronicles 3 tells us. We've got the Ark of the Covenant in here. The top of the Ark of the Covenant is called the what? It's the mercy seat, right? And that's where the high priest is going to come in one time a year and interact and supplicate God. Inside the Ark of the Covenant, we have three items. What are they? Aaron's rod that budded. The stone tablets from the giving of the Ten Commandments, and the pot of the manna that the Israelites ate while they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, okay? Talk to me for a minute there. Out of everything that you might have placed in the Ark of the Covenant, why these three things? Why not the stone that David used to take down Goliath? It'd have to be a lot bigger, but why not Goliath's sword? A whole lot of other, maybe some of the rocks that Joshua put in the Jordan River when they crossed in the promised land. Why put these three things into the ark? Julie.
The manna was God sustaining them.
God's provision. We're reminded of God's provision in the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so there's the manna. Why put Aaron's budding rod? Why put the tablets?
God's law.
God's law. God's provision. God's laws, the tablets.
God's power.
Delivery from bondage.
Direction.
Living from bondage or authority.
Authority.
Remember, that was the question with Aaron, and when his rod budded, who are we going to listen to? And God sent the answer by making sure that Aaron's rod was the one that flourished. We look inside the Ark of the Covenant, we get a message of provision, of authority, and law. Three principles that are near and dear to the heart of God, and three principles that need to be near and dear to our hearts as well. God's provision, God's law, and God's authority. All right, let's look at our questions. We've already gone through number one. We've answered kind of number two already. What are cherubim? And these were actual things.
Celestial beings.
Celestial beings, could we call them angels, right? When's the first place that we read of cherubim?
Guarding the guard.
Yeah, Genesis chapter 3. Turn back to Genesis 3 very briefly. Genesis capítulo 3, verso 24. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 24. God drove the man out of the garden, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he stationed the cherubim. That's plural. He stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword which turned every direction to guard the way of the tree of life. This is most likely where we get the association of angels with wings, cherubim, as we see here in the temple, as they're described in Ezekiel, are these angelic, these created spiritual beings that have wings. Not every angel in Scripture is described as having wings, but it seems as though the cherubim did. Yes, Jamie.
One of the things I love about the mercy seat and the cherubim is that John, when Mary looks into the tomb, there's an angel at the head and the foot of where Jesus' body lay, as he has become the mercy seat. So I love that.
Interesting connection to make there. Okay, so let's get over to what Lynn wants to talk about real quick. Let's talk about gold. Now, I'm going to share something interesting first, Lynn. I preached I taught a class similar to this. I was looking at my notes in 2015. The price of gold between 2015 and today has doubled. I wish I had bought some gold back in 2015. All right, so when we're looking at a talent, okay, number one, why are we talking about gold? Besides the fact that Lynn wanted to talk about gold, why are we talking about gold?
I believe we can't quite appreciate how ordinate, how spectacular.
Yeah. Yes, that's the point. The most holy place is covered in this. The holy place is covered in this. We've got this on the pillars as we're coming in. So, you've got 600 talents of gold, as I read it, in the most holy place. That's just the most holy place by itself. 600 talents of gold. Did anyone find out around about how many pounds are in a talent?
75.
Anywhere from 65 to 75, okay? So you're looking around 70 pounds in a talent, and you've got 600 talents of gold in the most holy place. Now, Gold, as of this morning, is going for $2,415 per troy ounce. And as Lynn well knows, a troy ounce is not the same thing as an ounce. And a troy ounce, there are 15.6 troy ounces in a pound. So we're about to do some math real quick. If we take 24.15, which is the price per troy ounce, and multiply it by 14.6, that gives us how much gold costs today per pound. And then we multiply that by 67, and that gives us the price of gold per talent. And then we multiply that by 600, and that gives us the 600 talents of gold in today's money in the most holy place. Any guesses?
1.4 billion.
1.4 what?
Billion.
Billion? Depending on your numbers for a talent, yes. That's the key there. You're anywhere, Lynn, from 100 million up towards a billion. Is that those the figures that you've got somewhere around in there?
I didn't do the calculations on that.
Okay.
Here's what I do.
Okay.
King David left 3,000 talents to build the temple, as well as other things.
Yes.
I told you the people gave 5,000 talents to the service. What I did was, what does that mean in weight?
Okay.
So the 3,000 talents means 130 tons of gold. The 5,000 talents, anyway, long story short, so when you add them both together,
Yeah.
they're about, I figured, and I said, what can we relate to? Most people can't relate to a ton.
Right.
A car weighs about 3,000 pounds average. So the first day at 3,000, that'd be 75 cars, pure gold. And if you add the others, what the people gave, that'd be over 200 cars of pure gold. And you kind of begin to understand it is a lot of gold. And that's not what Solomon got later. This
Right.
is what was left to build and run the temple.
And this is what you're fashioning into these various overlays, and some of these are not overlays, some of these are solid gold. All of this is going into this temple. So, if you ever get to walk into this temple, what are you struck by? Just the brilliance of it, and how just light would have been streaming at you, and then just the holiness, the uniqueness, the distinction of all of this. When we talk about holiness, and we're talking about distinction and not being common, but being uncommon and being unique. This is the picture of it right here. Julie, did I see your hand up, ma'am?
Yes.
What you got for me?
Well, people have to mine the gold
Yep.
beforehand.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was quite an ordeal.
It certainly would have been. Certainly would have been. So you're, by my calculations, and I'm using just a little bit different than Greg is, but I'm not by any means saying Greg is wrong, because there's a lot of wiggle room here. At a minimum, we're looking somewhere around, in today's costs, $141 million just for the gold on the inside of the most holy place by itself. Go ahead, John.
I was thinking about how hard I worked for my wife to get that little Cracker Jack.
No kidding.
But then, one thing, I watched a slaughter operation one time, and one thing I hadn't thought about, and we oftentimes don't think about, is the sounds that go along with that. Animals don't die quiet, no matter how you do it. So not only the smell, not only the sight, but I would say the sounds would be almost overwhelming.
Every sense that we have is going to be impacted coming into this compound.
And I actually know of almost no one who wants to go back to the old law and all of its parts. Every once in a while I'll talk to somebody who wants to keep part of the old law.
Right.
But almost never does anybody actually want
then it stands to condemn you.
Yeah.
Good point. Brother Roach, did I see your hand up, sir?
Yeah. I don't want to take us off point, but,
Then don't.
you know, it's remarkable that God is showing us in this temple construction how magnificent, how glorious, how special, how really different and unusual than everything that man has ever done. And yet, you get to the New Testament, and none of that is there. And it's not the braiding of hair with costly garments and gold and things like that. Now it's the beauty of the inner person, the spirit,
Sure.
which is rather remarkable.
Sure. And to tack on to what you say here, we recognize this is not the normal, right? This was not common and ordinary in Israel. And this is not the priests, for example, decking themselves out in this. All of this gold was ultimately for whom? It was for God, right? And it was intended to communicate what message to the people?
To put your very best towards God.
Why?
Because he's holy.
Because, was that you, Mitch? Because he's holy. And it's emphasizing, if we were to wander through this temple, the entire compound, that's the message we would be perceiving over and over and over again. Why the slaughter? Why the smoke? Why the washing? Why the gold? Because God is holy. And so it's a message to the people wherever they look. God is holy, and if we are to be followers of God, we've got to be holy as well. Mike.
And of course, the precious blood of Jesus Christ is worth
Sure.
more than silver and gold. And I think you answered what I was thinking. What makes gold worth money? I mean, why is it stood the test of time? Is it because it was used in the temple, one of the most holy? Is that what has always, because of how it was used back then, does that make it worth more?
I could not begin to tell you.
But you know what I'm saying? It's a
Yeah.
precious metal. I know it's rare.
Yeah.
But or was it at that time the most precious metal to it on earth?
Greg will be hosting 3 1-hour seminars later to explain precious metals to us all, if you'd like to know.
But obviously, I think it had to be worth a lot back then, too.
Certainly.
It's not a result of it being used in the temple, make it worth more. It was already worth
It was already
more.
precious.
Yeah,
Certainly. Connie.
This temple also was unlike the pagan temples.
Right?
They were built stone, marble, they had some sacrifice, but not so much. And, the priests were all elaborately dressed, and people would be bringing flowers and doing things. So it didn't look like any of the pagan
Especially from the exterior, this is not necessarily. You see a marked difference between the outside and the inside. That's not to say that the outside was lacking. If some of what I understand is right, this would have been beaming in the midst of a desert. But still, the outside of it is nothing to compare with the inside of it. Stephen, did I see your hand up?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Jesus' prediction about the destruction of Jerusalem, every stone would be turned over. Because they had so much gold, he knew what would happen. All that gold would be fallen by the Romans.
And there's a question as to, in Herod's temple, do you have the same magnificence that you did in Solomon's temple? And I'm inclined to think you didn't. But still, your point stands, Stephen. This still, even in their day, would have been a magnificent structure. And with it being overturned, things are going to happen. You're right. Josh, did you have your hand up as well, sir?
Yeah, it's kind of related to what Stephen asked. Whenever Hezekiah, whenever God tells Hezekiah that everything's going to be taken,
Yeah.
when Hezekiah showed his home, would it have included everything that was in his home? Would it have included?
Okay. I'm thinking for a minute. John, help me here. Is Hezekiah, and this is going to put you on the spot too, just like he just put me on the spot. Is this before or after they've taken the gold out of the temple and substituted it with bronze?
My guess
Me too.
Is that the gold was still there. I don't think when Hezekiah showed them all that was in his house.
That it would have been
That would have been
everything in the
gold,
temple.
utensils,
Right.
but God still was very displeased with
Certainly.
what Hezekiah did.
Certainly.
So my guess is that Hezekiah would not have shown.
What we're talking about, there comes a point in Old Testament history where Judah's under attack. They're trying to make peace with their neighbors. They do it the wrong way, and they strip the gold out of the temple. And they substitute brass for gold, right? And so they're departing from God's plan. They're departing from this image of God that is portrayed in there. Josh's question is, when Hezekiah showed them all that was within his house and the treasures of his house, would it have included much of the gold from the temple? I don't know. There's some parts of the temple he would not have been permitted to go into and to retrieve objects from. And so there's that issue right there. And of course, eventually what's going to happen to Solomon's temple? It's going to be destroyed after the reign of Hezekiah. It's going to be destroyed, going to be carried off. They're going to rebuild it in the book of Ezra. And look at, off the top of my head, Ezra chapter 3. Ezra 3. So Ezra 1 and Ezra 2 details the Jews that are coming back from captivity. And in Ezra chapter 3 and in verse 11, they lay the foundation for the temple, for the temple that's going to be rebuilt. Solomon's temple has been destroyed. They're rebuilding the new temple. All the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. The old men are doing what in verse 12? Everyone's shouting and cheering except for the old men who are doing what? They're weeping, and they're weeping, Ezra specifically notes for us, in connection with what?
This new one is nothing like the old one.
They had seen the first temple in all its glory. And the foundation that's being laid here obviously makes them think of the magnificence of the old temple and how this new temple is different. I believe it's Zechariah who's going to say, you look at this temple in comparison with Solomon's temple, and outwardly it appears way less. But by prophecy he says the glory of the latter temple is going to exceed the glory of the former temple. That the glory of the rebuilt temple, even though it did not have the gold and the splendor of the first temple, it was going to exceed it in glory. Why might that be? Because of Jesus. Because the Son of God is going to be presented in the new temple. And he's going to preach in that new temple. And he's going to be involved there. That the culmination of God's plan would be coming about in that new temple. Very good. Question number 2. When you think about the temple, what was it going to be? 2 Chronicles 7, 1 Kings 5, 1 Kings 6. What all these reveal to us about the temple? Anybody? A house of sacrifice.
God's name.
A place for God's name. House of the Lord's. But 1 Kings 6:2 says this will be a house for the Lord. But Stephen in Acts chapter 7 says what? God does not dwell in temples made with hands. So what's with that? If this is a house for the Lord, but God doesn't dwell in temples made with hands, then what in the world is going on here? Mike?
It's a place where man could meet with God.
There you go.
In the form of the priest, to actually be in the presence of God, to supplicate for humanity, basically.
This goes back to our theme for this year. Exodus chapter 3. Moses do what?
Take your sandals off.
Take your shoes off. Because the ground upon which you stand is holy. Why was that ground holy? He was in the presence of God. But aren't we always in the presence of God? And the answer is
Yes.
yes. But there are times when what? When we come into the presence of God in a unique way, in an intentional way, like we have today. We have come into the presence. Were you in the presence of God Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday? Are we in the presence of God today? Yes, but we're in the presence of God in a very unique way today, aren't we? Moses took off his shoes at the burning bush, and when he left the burning bush, what did he do? He put his shoes back on. Was he still in the presence of God? Yes, he was, but not in the same way when he was before the burning bush. It's the same thing with the temple. As they came into the temple, this was the place where you came to encounter God in a special and significant and a unique way. Does that mean they didn't encounter God or weren't in God's presence the rest of the time? No. But it means when they came into the temple, it was a unique moment to encounter the presence and the person of God. Did God live in the temple? Stephen says, no, God isn't therapied with the hands of men. He doesn't need the things that you and I need. That's just not who God is or what God is. And then you get to questions 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. What spiritual significance did the writer of Hebrews attach to the most holy place? That Jesus entered into the real what? He entered into the real most holy place. Why could Jesus not go into the literal most holy place? He was not a priest. How do we know he wasn't a priest? He was of the tribe of Judah. The Hebrew writer says, of which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning the priesthood, right? There's a really good lesson for us about God's silence, that when God specifies one thing, everything else, God didn't have to say if you're of the tribe of Reuben or Simeon or Judah or Issachar, you don't get to be a priest. When he said, my priests are coming from Levi, that was sufficient. So Jesus couldn't go into the literal most holy place, but he did go into where? To the real most holy place. Which is where? In the presence of God in heaven, right? That's going to be Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 24. He entered into the presence of God. Into what most holy place? The heavenly most holy place, Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 24. With what did Jesus enter the most holy place?
With his blood.
With his blood. Not the blood of what? Not the blood of bulls and goats, but with his own blood he entered that most holy place. And for what purpose did he enter that true most holy place? Hebrews 9 and 10, to secure eternal redemption. He is the sacrifice. He has always been the sacrifice by which men and women will be saved. Appreciate your good attention and your comments this morning. Thank you.